Oh, no!
Hey everyone, it's Andy Kushner, host of The Wedding Biz. And if you missed last week's episode, we now have a new segment to the show, which is called The Next Level. And after each guest episode of every week, we're going to also be releasing, like we are now, a shorter episode of approximately 12 to 15 minutes in which myself and my wonderful marketing director and an incredible wedding industry consultant, Melissa Fancy.
Hello.
Sitting with me today. She's going to co-host these segments with me. And in it, we're going to talk about what we all can learn from the guest discussion. Not only what inspires us, but also what can we use to help facilitate not only sustaining an incredible business, but growing our business. What are the tools? What can we pull out of this conversation with this incredible guest? And today's guest is David Tutera, an icon in the business. He's been around a long time. He has seen it all. It was just so exciting for me to be able to talk with him. And I've actually worked with him, and he is completely for real. And all that we talked about, I was just so inspired. He came up with so many things that we can use. And that's what Melissa and I are going to do today.
Yes. And, I actually really have a secret fangirl about this because when I was younger, David Tutera's name was like everywhere. So it was really cool for me to be able to listen to this episode, listen to his voice. I've seen him on the shows growing up and and
he's got a lot of energy, that guy.
Yeah. So this was a really fun one for me.
Yeah, that's great. Well, why don't we start with, I think, a really key point he made. I was asking him, basically, he's got such a kind of complicated career. I mean, he had, I believe, 14 consecutive years in television, and he was producing, designing, planning just an enormous amount of incredible events, and often around the same time. It was just a lot to balance. And yeah, so one of the questions I had for him, which you all haven't heard it, you should definitely listen to the full episode, is how he handles the business side of it.
Yeah.
How does he maintain such a career?
Well, I think that one of the things he is so inspiring just by being part of our world with is he has a really incredible ability to make everything he does feel like he's doing that 100%. Even though all of those things are things that all happened at one time or, symbiotic with the other things, he's still, he puts out his brand, he's doing events, he's doing all these things, but none of it feels like he halfway did them. He's all in for them. And I think he's a perfect example of how to really scale your career and push outside of all of the limitations that come with specific fields within our industry, right? So, if you are a photographer and it's just you all by yourself and you're stuck doing, 52 weddings a year so that you can have this crazy successful business, there has to be a switch. There has to be something more than working yourself into the ground, So you see photographers that will figure out how to charge more or grow their team. And David is somebody who said, that's all great and fine, but we're going to take this and elevate it. We're going to branch out. I'm going to reinvent myself and go do this and go do that.
Yeah. And that was something that was really important, was not only, we talked about the issue of when something shifts in the industry or in our own lives, that is not necessarily the time to reinvent yourself. The time to reinvent yourself is even before that happens. And so David and I talked a lot about doing that throughout. And I like how he termed it. He talked about reinventing himself by expanding his vision and allowing himself to do new things. Like this, he started this some time ago, his event symposium. He's got something that he started about 5-6 months ago called Dear David on Facebook, where people can ask questions. But the point was that I think by opening up your mind and not waiting until you're in some stuck position and that you've hit a wall,
not doing it out of desperation.
Yeah, or a recession or something.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, I think that what happens is a lot of times people get so busy, and I know this is totally like a quotable, right? Like they're so busy working in their business that they forget to work on it. And that moment doesn't come until they are at a conference and they get like an aha moment, or they are like you're talking about in some sort of desperation. And what I find so interesting is I haven't personally, maybe you have. I haven't found one industry person that is talented only at one thing. Like everybody we work with and know, everybody, I haven't met anybody at any conference who says, oh yeah, I can only do this one really niche thing. Like they do so many things, but they really focus on one area or two areas.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a challenge being able to do so many things.
But the other thing is, hey, if you're in the wedding industry, as far as I know, you're a multitasker. So you can really push outside the bounds of just the one or two things. Yeah,
and let's address that because David and I also spoke about that in terms of multitasking. And I asked him, I mean, how are you staying... How are you dealing with all this? How are you balancing? How are you staying so organized? And he talked about to-do lists and some of the things, that we all do. But one thing that really grabbed my attention was in terms of how he prioritizes. I mean, we all know that you want to prioritize, quote unquote, what is the most important, but he defined that. And I thought this was brilliant, right? He talked about the first thing that he's going to work on is what is going to make him the most money. Right? Because this is a business. We're in a business to make money.
Okay, but time out. I think that a lot of people forget. I'm definitely here to say, like, we focus on our couples, we give them all of our attention and make it about them. But we also can't forget that we are a business. We are not creatives for the sake of being creatives.
That's right.
We still have families and homes and cars and all these things that need to be paid for. And so to just say, no, you're supposed to just do this for the passion is, I think, a little bit limiting. And that's one thing I love about David is he really finds and prioritizes what is going to keep everything going, because that has almost like, I don't want to say trickle down, but it has a trickle down sort of effect on the other things in his business that he likes to do.
Yeah. And he made the point that often we will prioritize what is the easiest to do because then we can feel like we accomplished something. I mean, I'm guilty of that. It's like, I know if I do this, I can get it done. I can feel good, but then I'm not necessarily doing what's best for my business.
Right. Well, and it's like, how the people that say, like, with your credit card debt, like, pay off the one that's the easiest to pay off first and then tackle. It's sort of the opposite, though.
Yeah.
You have to focus on what is going to get you to your purpose faster, whatever that end goal is.
And kind of connected to this, we also talked about in terms of balancing getting everything done, we talked about delegating.
Yes.
And he had kind of a different way of saying it. He said that you have to delegate, but yet control the outcome so that you know what's going to happen and that you've got to stay on top of people. Now, he did say that, of course, as he gets bigger and bigger and more is going on, that you can't, he's not talking about micromanaging.
Right.
But I'm guilty of this, in my music business. God, did I make some mistakes there? But I would delegate and I would trust, but I would then kind of get out of the picture and it caused a lot of problems for me.
Yeah. And I think when you are someone like David, you put together little teams and you manage and there's, all different vertical reporting that happens there. One of my favorite interviews that you did that managed or talked about team management was Ian Prosser.
Yeah.
He's somebody who's doing like insane, very large scale, wonderful, incredible events. But, he really talks about his team a lot and he very successfully manages his team. And that, I think, is something that so many of us in our smaller businesses really struggle with. It's really hard to learn the balance of stepping away and letting your staff manage things, but also make sure that what they're executing is to the level of perfection that you would give it. And there is a balance I think David has absolutely found there. And it's so inspiring.
You know who else talks a lot about this aspect? I would encourage all of you listening to also check out, if you haven't yet, the episode with Bryan Rafanelli.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Bryan, extremely creative, but also really a brilliant business mind.
Yeah.
And we talk about that. And another person that comes to mind too, who was on the show, is David Stark. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you remember this, Melissa, but there was a point where I was asking David, I said, how do you balance the business with the art? And my point, I was kind of leaning toward, gee, doesn't this suck? We got to do the business. He gave the most interesting answer, which immediately changed my perspective in my own businesses. He said, and Bryan also alluded to this, but David straight out said that to me, creating a business structure is a creative act.
Yes.
That's how he looks at it, that creating a business structure is a creative act into of itself. That changed everything for me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a huge aha moment for you, right? I mean, we all look at all of the things that we love to do most and put those on the top of the pile. And we forget that all of the other things, managing staff, helping them understand how to work with you and on your behalf, all of those things are just as important. You know, they get us to that end goal.
That's right. That's right. And also kind of connected to this too is we had a discussion about price and value, you know?
That's a big one.
Oh, it's a huge one. And it's so difficult. I mean, David was pointing out that, you know, one of the problems is that, or challenge is that the client is usually a one-time consumer, usually.
Yeah.
And so there's more pressure on us. And so what I took out of the conversation with him, and he was talking about how a lot of times we in the industry and in any business, if we're really leading with fear, you know, and I mean, we all feel that at times. He talked about his, everyone I've met with talks about fear. Colin Cowie had a great story about that. And who would think, right, that he ever feels fear? And, you know,
who would think any of us actually feel fear until you talk?
He had a great story. I absolutely got to listen to that episode if you haven't. But in any case, price versus value. And so David was making the point that if you're leading with your fear, then you tend to cave with your pricing.
Oh, yeah. You're like afraid of this fake judgment that you think is happening when they're oftentimes just processing, you know? I think it's definitely value. It's also how talented are you at painting the picture of what they should be paying for?
Yes.
You know, and if you are afraid, you're not going to be able to paint that picture. You know, you're not going to be able to sell them. If you're like, how about this number? How do you feel about that? That's totally different than being like, okay, I have this amazing idea. I know it costs this much, but here's the idea. Totally different conversations, right? And that's a conversation that I know our friend Sean Lowe, if you guys go listen to his episode, he's incredible. He has a fantastic blog and a total creative community, but he will push that, you know, and that is something that we all have got to learn how to manage, but not just manage. You know, I'm reading this book and it totally touches this topic, but it also confirms what David is saying here with the fear part. If you look at fear, and it could be anything. It could be the fear of talking about pricing. It could be the fear of public speaking, which I actually have.
Hard to know. What are you kidding me?
Yes. But if you look at fear and you don't sit here and struggle with it internally and have this idea that it's something you need to overcome, then it won't be so hard. If you look at fear and you let yourself fully feel that and say, okay, there that all is. All right. Now, moving on. Like if you recognize it and then you can move forward and say, hey, fear, how's it going? I made friends with you. You're here. That's cool. But I got a job to do. That's a way more powerful thing to go forward with when you're talking about pricing.
It's hard to sit with it. You know, like I know my tendency when I'm feeling fear is to just completely run from it quickly. But what David was talking about is don't do that. You know, sit there, think about it. And he said, that's right. Well, and he said that he basically said people are scared, you know, when they feel fear and they, like, for instance, you know, cave with their pricing, they're scared of losing business. But in reality, in the long term, you're losing more.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Because if you are afraid in that one opportunity when you're talking to a client, and this happens, I think, when people raise their prices, they have this like fear of, oh, what are they going to say about this? If you keep doing that and you give in to your fear, you will never elevate your pricing ever. You'll never be able to make more because you're always going to be stuck in this cyclical thing of I'm not worth what I'm trying to charge, but I'm also not worth what I wish I could charge someday. You just always will be there. You won't ever get past that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, another point that came up, we were talking about dealing with clients. And I believe I asked him about, does he ever turn away clients? You know, and this is, you know, subjective. It's a personal thing, right? There are a lot of the guests on the show have talked a lot about really the power. It's empowering to allow yourself to not work with someone who's not going to allow you to really do what you do best for whatever reason. And I know that Lynn Easton, who was on the show, had a really interesting story about, this is interesting. It was a client, and she said it happened twice in her career, client that she already had, and there started to be serious problems with this client and how she addressed it. But in terms of what David said about clients, he said, you know, you don't necessarily, and this is his opinion, but it's interesting, you don't necessarily necessarily have to love your client, but you have to love what you do for your client. And again, it's a little bit of a shift in perspective.
That hit me too when he said that. And I think for me, it was so powerful because I really haven't heard anybody say that. It almost like there's such a vibe out there that you should feel empowered to just say no and walk away. I'm not saying that you need to not, right? But this is such a cool thing because you can actually treat it like he treats fear and say, okay, you know what? This client is not going to be my best friend. But I freaking love my job and I love what I do and I love working with my vendors and I love working at this venue. So we're just going to go in there and we're going to do a killer job and it's going to be beautiful and they're going to have a great day and they won't even know that they didn't connect with me the same way that my old, amazing clients that are ride or dies do.
That's right.
And that's okay because he still gets to come away from this just as satisfied because he's doing this because he loves his job.
But that you should be equally satisfied.
Right.
And he also spoke, though, on the other side of it is that the most memorable weddings for him are when he connects with his client.
Oh, of course. Yes. Yeah.
And speaking of that, too, we also talked about techniques, to get to know our new clients. And I was thinking back to, it was one of the really early episodes with Matthew Robbins, who, I urge all of you to listen to that episode, too, because he talks extensively about what does he do in order to not just to get to know his clients, but to connect with his clients and what that means then for the event they work together. Well, that's all we have time for today. So we want to thank everyone for listening to the show. And Melissa?
Yeah, you guys, you need to be following us on Instagram if you're not already. It's Wedding Biz Show. And we love talking to our listeners. So make sure you're commenting, make sure you're instant messaging us.
There's definitely so much more that we can get out of this episode. And so we are going to provide our listeners with a full takeaway that Andy and I will put together. We'll email to you. If you guys go to our website and sign up just in our newsletter pop-up, we will send this out to you, the full takeaway. And then every week we're going to be giving that to you. So if you're on that mailing list, we'll be sending out the full takeaway from every episode. It's really exciting. We just think there is so much awesome information within each episode, and we want to really pull that out for you.
Make sure you're subscribing to the podcast in general, too, so that it's just there for you every Monday morning when you wake up.
That's right. You get notices of what's happening. And
yeah.
And this, again, this is just so exciting. And our next episode is a big one for us. It is going to be our first year anniversary.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I can't believe that. I get to be a part of this now.
Oh, absolutely.
So
absolutely. Yeah. It's going to be a really fun show. We've got some really cool things happening. So everyone, please tune in. And again, thank you so much. Just so grateful to have you as a part of our community.